Greetings, former students and friends of Professor Randy Coleman. I'm welcoming you as Bob Pike, Chair of the Chemistry Department at William & Mary, to this re-recording of Professor Coleman's farewell lecture entitled A Walk Down Memory Lane with Professor Coleman. I'm so glad that you can join us for this recording and that you would like to hear this wonderful lecture. And as I welcome you to it, I would like to offer a few thoughts of my own about Professor Coleman. But let me start by reading the citation that William & Mary issued to Randy upon his retirement. That statement reads as follows. Randolph Coleman received his A.B. in chemistry from Susquehanna University in 1966. He earned his Ph.D. in organic chemistry from Purdue University in 1970, working under Professor Herbert C. Brown, who received a Nobel Prize in 1979. Randy joined the William & Mary faculty in 1970 as an assistant professor of chemistry. He was promoted to associate professor in 1976 and to professor in 2017. Randy has received both of William & Mary's highest faculty awards. In 1998, he was awarded the Thomas Jefferson Award, which recognizes significant service through personal activities, influence, and leadership. And then in 2018, he received the Thomas Graves Jr. Award for sustained excellence in teaching. As confirmed by these honors, Professor Coleman has been a dedicated, innovative teacher. He has inspired generations of students to pursue medical and research careers through his joy of teaching. His foundational courses, including organic chemistry and biochemistry, have challenged students for decades. His freshman seminar call course, entitled The Chemistry of Emotion and Behavior, has been immensely popular with new students. His engaging senior level call course, entitled Neurochemistry, has introduced students to cutting-edge scientific literature and been a longtime staple of the neuroscience program. In addition, Randy has initiated many students into scientific research through his own research group, often working with as many as 20 or more students at a time. Outside the classroom, Professor Coleman has significantly transformed the student experience. He initiated William & Mary's pre-medical advising program and was its heart and soul for a remarkable 35 years. He also founded our undergraduate academic advising program, serving as the first faculty head of the Office of Academic Advising and helping to bring the Banner system to campus. After leaving the Office of Academic Advising and returning to the chemistry department in 2005, Professor Coleman embarked on a completely new research direction in biochemistry, engaging a large number of undergraduate researchers in his research and partnering with researchers at Eastern Virginia Medical School. He has used mathematical models to better understand neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Huntington's, and multiple sclerosis. Demonstrating the relevance and importance of his research, Randy's work has been supported by the Commonwealth Health Advisory Board and the Virginia Alzheimer's and Related Diseases Fund. His results have been published in numerous high-impact neuroscience journals, illustrating its potential impacts through undergraduate research. Professor Coleman has been a wise and generous mentor to his students, for his advisees, and in fact for his colleagues. He is irreplaceable, and he leaves William & Mary a better, kinder place. So that's a wonderful testament to Randy's work here at William & Mary and his impact on his students, as well as education and research in his field. But let me add a personal thought. I've looked at Randy's course evaluations from as early as the 70s and 80s up to the present time. And you see one thing again and again and again. In addition to praising Randy for the rigor and scientific content of his courses, his students routinely point out that Professor Coleman is a caring individual who cared about them as human beings, not just as numbers on a ledger, that he wanted to know how they were doing. He wanted to know how things were going for them. He took walks with them, chatted with them, listened to them. That sort of personal care is really what education ought to be founded on, because it's about the individual. And it's not something you can fake. To truly care for the individual holistically as part of the educational experience is a wonderful thing. And Randy has really led the way in showing us how to do that. And so my hat is off to him in terms of showing us what really matters in education. And so I hope you enjoy the video you're about to see. Randy's a delightful storyteller. That shows up in his evaluations as well. He knows how to engage his audience. And I think part of the reason is that he speaks from the heart. So without any further ado, here's Professor Coleman, a walk down memory lane in his own words.
Well, hello. This uh, this is a recording that is being made in my home office because the uh, the event on Saturday, May 11th, went off very well. Commonwealth Auditorium was almost filled to capacity. The audience was very receptive to what I had to say. The only snafu was that there was no audio in the recording, and I wanted to get my life story out to those who were interested in hearing it. So the chairman and I and Don Alleman, our administrative assistant in chemistry, decided that maybe one way to correct everything was to do a Zoom version of the talk. So here I am about to do the Zoom version of the talk, but I'd like to think of this maybe facetiously, as the extended director's cut, because I've added a few things and I'm going to expand on some of the comments that I made in the actual program on the 11th. So if you're getting a hold of this Zoom version, you're going to have more than what the folks got on the 11th. And with that said, I'm going to share a screen, the PowerPoint screen, and we'll begin the the program. So a walk down memory lane, back up for just a moment. A walk down memory lane is the title of the talk. And to begin that walk down memory lane, I'm going to go all the way back to my beginning, which is with my parents. And I like to dedicate this talk to my parents. My parents were both born not long after the turn of the 20th century in the early 1900s. They both were from farm families, lived on farms, helped with the farm chores, all that in Pennsylvania. And in those days, it was not unusual, especially for the women. Forgive me, you women folk out there, but especially for the women to not complete high school. And my mother, in fact, quit school at the end of the eighth grade to help with the farm. My father, in another county there in Pennsylvania, went through the 10th grade, and to the chagrin of his high school math teacher, he quit in the 10th grade. Dad liked to tell me that the high school math teacher was upset with him because my dad was very good with numbers and the math teacher saw a lot of potential in him. But he chose to go back to the farm and to help his family with the farm chores, which were not easy in those days. He often told me about using a team of mules to drive a plow through the field. And he said, it's true, mules are extremely stubborn. So that was a point of frustration for Dad. Um, and that's the life that they had early on. I like to think of this story as a love story on many levels. At one level, my love for my parents, and you'll see as we go through this talk that there are many other things that I love. including my wife. We'll go ahead and get started with the rest of the story, if you will. So I'm going to start the story in the 1950s, even though I was born in the 1940s. I didn't do a whole lot in the 1940s, so there's not much of a story to tell there. So we're going to begin in the 1950s, and I've broken this talk out into decades, like you see here. Each decade is going to have some discussion points. Here in the 50s, I want to talk about Steelton, Pennsylvania, my hometown, some hometown adventures that I went through, and then my meeting of April, my wife, in the seventh grade. So that will all be apparent as we go through the program. So Steelton, Pennsylvania, as the name suggests, actually is a steel town. And if we look at the next slide, here is Steelton in a historical picture that I think is around the time that I would have been growing up in the town. So this is a suburb of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. In fact, the Harrisburg city line and the Steelton city line butt up against one another. This is a little town south of Harrisburg on the Susquehanna River. You see the Susquehanna River right here. I hope you can see my cursor because I'm going to be using it a lot. So if we look at this picture, we have the Susquehanna River and we have the Pennsylvania Railroad main line right along here that connects Harrisburg to Philadelphia. And then inside those mainline tracks, we have the Bethlehem Steel Corporation. And you can see part of it here. It was a pretty massive operation when I was growing up. I don't think we can see the blast furnaces here, but it stretches along the river way down past where my cursor is going. And then we have the town of Steelton on a hill overlooking Bethlehem Steel and the Susquehanna River. So Front Street in Steelton is back here and is the boundary street between Bethlehem Steel Corporation and the town of Steelton. So Steelton extends up to the top of a hill. At the top of the hill is a portion of the town called Cottage Hill. And I grew up not on the top of the hill, but in a street right down from the top of the hill. So if we look at the town from the point of view of Cottage Hill, we see this view, and you get a sense of the crowded condition of the town. There wasn't a lot of green space, but what there was in the town, or what there were plenty of churches. So you can see in this picture a church right here, a church right here, and a church up on the hill over here. So this is a town, a blue-collar town, a town with many different cultures and ethnicities in the town. A lot of the steel workers from the town grew up in Eastern Europe. So I had a lot of friends that were from Serbia and Croatia and Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and so on. Many of those families immigrated to the United States, and the men found work here at the Bethlehem Steel Corporation. So it was a real melting pot of cultures and a fun place to grow up. Now, I mentioned the churches, okay? There was a church on almost every corner in the town, but there also was a bar on almost every corner in the town. So we're looking at folks here who lived life to the fullest. They had gods to worship, but they also enjoyed a beer or two, especially the steel workers coming off a hot day at the steel mill would stop off at a bar on Front Street in Steelton, and there were plenty of bars to accommodate the steel workers. And that's just the way life was. This is also a town that is very much tuned into Bethlehem Steel Corporation and vice versa. So, for example, Bethlehem Steel, in an agreement with the town folks, shut down the blast furnaces and shut down all the smokestacks on Monday. And Monday was the official wash day for the women in the town. And I emphasize the women in the town because they were the ones who really were taking care of the households. So Monday was wash day, and there were no automatic washers and dryers back when I was growing up. So all the clothes got hung out on clotheslines around the town, which is why the Bethlehem Steel Corporation shuts down all the sooty um, conditions that they would normally be producing. And if I would stand on the back porch of my home and look up and down the backyards on either side of our property, I would see clothes hanging on clotheslines on essentially every house that I could see. So Monday, again, not to overemphasize it, but Monday was the official wash day in Steelton. If we look to the east end of town, there's a little village, you might say, called appropriately the East End. And that's where April, my wife, future wife, grew up. Her property was right here. If you can see my cursor waving, that's where she lived. And her father was a Bethlehem Steel employee. He could walk down this very steep hill, go across the street, and enter the Bethlehem Steel Corporation right there at the East End. So that's where he worked. And that's where April grew up. And there was an elementary school here in this little village that educated the students through the sixth grade. So in the seventh grade, April got bused to my end of town. I lived in the central part of town, and she joined the school system there starting in the seventh grade. And that's when I met her. I didn't know at the time she was going to be my future wife, but that's the way it all played out. So most of the men in the town worked in Bethlehem Steel. My father, on the other hand, worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And this is a picture of the Pennsylvania Railroad classification yard in Enola, Pennsylvania, where Dad worked all his life. Now, what does that mean to folks who don't know railroading? Well, a classification yard is a place where incoming trains will be broken up in the sense that the boxcars and other cars that they brought in the train will be divided up into outgoing trains that may have different destinations. So we have westbound trains and we have eastbound trains all converging in this massive classification yard. And I say massive because at the time my father worked there, the Enola classification yard for the Pennsylvania Railroad was the largest classification yard in the country. This view may give some feel for that. You also see a lot of overhead lights because this was an operation that ran 24/7, 365 days a year. It was a very busy time. My father worked the morning shift. Usually there were three shifts for the 24-hour day. He normally worked the morning shift, but he also was called out sometimes to help in the afternoon or even the night shift. So we weren't ever sure. He was always happy to go. As an hourly employee, you want to collect as much money as you can, so you're willing to put in as many hours as you need to. And he didn't mind missing family activities on holidays because if he worked on a holiday, he sometimes got double time and a half, which was pretty lucrative for him in those days. So I have much sympathy for hourly employees. That was driven home in my upbringing in my family. Just thinking about the blue collar experience that I had growing up. Now, Steelton was a wonderful place for a young boy to have fun. I had many adventures. I enjoyed exploring the woods close to home. I enjoyed my introduction to science, if you will, was through biology and my study of insects. I fell in love with ants, if you will, ants, ants. Yes, you heard me correctly. And I would go off in the woods and I'd find an ant trail and I'd map the trail back to the home colony and just kind of watch the ants as they went about their business. And it was a lot of fun learning about ants. I took a lot of notes. I did a fair amount of reading about ants and colonies and the different workers in a colony and so on. So my first introduction to science was through biology, if you will, and a study of ants. And I really delved into that study pretty deeply. I uh, I essentially explored all of the books in the school library about ants. The Steelton Library was not a very good library for a topic like that, but I took the bus, public transportation, into Harrisburg, where the state capitol was located, and there was a state library that was used for the Capitol workers, the legislators, if you will, kind of like the Library of Congress is available to our congressional leaders. We have a state library in Harrisburg that was a pretty good library. So I ended up exploring a lot of information about ants in the state library. Now, think about what I just said. There was no internet in those days. What I did took a lot of time. You needed to be interested in the topic to do what I did. There were encyclopedias available in many homes. The Probably the number one encyclopedia was Britannica, and encyclopedia salesmen were always going around door to door trying to sell encyclopedias to families for their children's use. We ended up with a set of encyclopedias in my home, but it wasn't Britannica. Um, what I'd like to say here is that you needed to have a real interest and a motivation to do what I did, to take the bus, to go to a different library, to look things up and take notes, and then come back and feel satisfied. What do you do today? Probably look at Google or Wikipedia or something like that, and you can't always trust the electronic sources like you can the printed sources. So I had a quite different experience growing up with term papers in school and exploring my own interests in the topics that were of most interest to me. I also enjoyed collecting butterflies. We had a farm at the very top of the hill in Steelton, going out into another adjoining town. There was a farm there that had a long lane leading back to the farmhouse, and the lady of the farm had planted a lot of zinnias along the road. And my friend and I went up to the door, knocked on the door, politely asked if we could catch butterflies at her flowers, and she said, "Oh, sure." So that was a gold mine. We would go there frequently on a weekend and catch butterflies and mount them and have nice butterfly collections and read all about butterflies and moths and so on. So again, my introduction to science, I like to think of it like that, was initially in the realm of biology. Now, there were other fun things to do in Steelton. For example, playing baseball. So here I am with my Lions baseball team, and I'll give you 15 seconds to find me in this picture. So go at it. The clock is ticking. Can you find Professor Coleman in this picture? And the answer is right in the front center. This young man right here is me. I was a fast runner back in those days, and the coach had me playing center field. I could cover a lot of territory if a ball got hit my way with the speed that I had. And thank goodness I had that speed, because one of my other teammates, Murphy, here on the end, I'm kind of circling his face a little bit. Murphy played right field, but Murphy was easily distracted. The coach would frequently holler out to him, "Murph, quit chasing butterflies." Okay, that'll give you some sense of what Murph was up to. So whenever the ball came my way or even in the right field, I'd go running and try to catch it because I couldn't count on Murphy doing much of anything in right field. Um, so the Lions baseball team was one of the fun things that I did. I also got my first chemistry lab, and you notice that this is the original. You can see that it's torn here, but this was my original chem lab, and it had over 1,000 experiments in it. And I learned how to weigh things and mix things and do interesting things that in today's world you probably couldn't do. I don't think they could sell you a chem lab like I had in today's world. But you notice they had the periodic table here, they had a metric conversion. So I started learning a lot of chemistry here as a young boy. And we come to the 1960s and high school and college and marriage and graduate school. So I went off to high school there in Steelton and did pretty well in all of my subjects, but I was especially fond of the sciences and especially fond of chemistry and physics and math. And I ended up tutoring and helping a lot of my classmates in those three subjects, chemistry, physics, and math. And it was at that point that I began to realize that I had a pretty good ability to take a complex subject and put it into terms that my classmates could understand. So my classmates frequently turned to me when they were having trouble with problems in those subjects, and I was helping them. And that was a first indication of the satisfaction that I felt as I helped my classmates. It was a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed it. Um, when I graduated high school, along with April, we were in the same class, same graduating class. The class of 1962 is when we graduated. Uh, we came back for a 50th year reunion of our high school and looked at our old yearbooks. I pulled out my yearbook, looked at my picture, my senior class picture, and lo and behold, I discovered that even back then, here I am at the ripe age of 18, I erased all the stuff off to the side of my picture, but I circled one thing that stood out in my mind looking back at the 50th year reunion. Back in high school, I already knew I wanted to teach chemistry. There it is in plain words, plans to teach chemistry. And that picture is worth the price of admissions, right? That's Coleman at age 18. Aha. All right. So graduated in 62. Thanks to my high school teachers who were my mentors and advisors. I needed them. I couldn't count on my parents. My parents provided all the support and love they could, but there were some things they couldn't do. So I had to rely on mentors and advisors in my life. Mentors and advisors like found in high school, found in my church, found in the Boy Scout troop that I belonged to. My Boy Scout leader was a really good mentor to me in a variety of ways, but my high school chemistry teacher in particular was an excellent mentor, and he helped guide me to college. He told my parents, "This young man has to go to college." So we did. Mom actually went to work to help put me through school. Dad continued to do what he did, and I worked for North American Van Lines in the summer to help put myself through school. Though it was not an easy time for a blue collar family to support a child going to college, but they did, and I'm forever grateful. So I went off to Susquehanna University, which is a small liberal arts school about 50 miles up the Susquehanna River from Harrisburg, and had a great education there. This is a small church affiliated, Lutheran church affiliated liberal arts school. I enjoyed just about every subject that I took there, but I was obviously especially fond of chemistry and math and physics. I did a lot of physics and a lot of math in addition to all the chemistry I could get my hands on. The chemistry department at Susquehanna was comprised of three professors. One of them was an organic chemistry, biochemistry professor, and he's the one that really became my strong mentor while I was at Susquehanna. There was another professor who was a physical chemist and inorganic chemist. And then the third professor was a female. She was an analytical chemist, a really top-notch analytical chemist, pushed us very, very hard in analytical chemistry to get things right, which means most of the time to make sure your measurements and weights and everything were very, very, very accurate. So that's the best thing I can say. It was a small department, but then the school was small, but a great education. Um, I had fun there also. I joined a fraternity, Theta Chi fraternity, and when I gave this talk in Commonwealth Auditorium, my family was sitting in the first two rows, and all my grandchildren were there, and I was hesitant to say what I'm about to say again here. While I was in my fraternity, I became the pledge marshal, helping to supervise new pledges to the fraternity. I became the keg marshal, rounding up a beer keg to take off campus, no drinking on campus. And we would go to a park along the Susquehanna River and have our parties. That was pretty good. Occasionally, we would drive up to Bucknell University in Lewisburg, which wasn't that far from us. And the Theta Chi chapter at Bucknell had some really good parties as well. So Professor Coleman enjoyed the fraternity life at Susquehanna University. So I progressed through my education there, and in the spring of my senior year, April and I got together again at the end of the sophomore year from Susquehanna. I went home, called her up and said, "Do you want to go out on a date?" And she said yes. And the rest is history, so to speak, because she didn't want to go steady in high school. She wanted to play the field. I wanted to go steady with her, but no such luck. So I was going to make one final effort at the end of my sophomore year to try to link up with this pretty young lady, and was fortunate that she said yes. So we started dating, eventually got engaged, planned for a marriage right after graduation from Susquehanna University, before I went off to graduate school. But my mom in particular was making some grandiose plans for the wedding, and April and I didn't really want to do that. So we changed our wedding plans and got married over spring break in my senior year at Susquehanna. So we got married, and if you look at this picture, this is in the car of my best man about to drive us around town, hooting and hollering, if you will. So here is a marriage that's less than an hour old, probably. And right now, April and I are in our 59th year of marriage. When I said that on the 11th of May, I got a nice round of applause because you don't hear about too many marriages with that kind of longevity. But April and I have stuck it out through thick and thin, and have enjoyed each other's company ever since. So we got married there in my spring break, and I still, to this day, talk about spring break for the seniors at William and Mary. We come back from spring break in the spring semester, and the course that I'm teaching or that I taught right up to the end was neurochemistry, which is a capstone course in the neuroscience program for seniors. And I'd always ask them, "Hey, did anyone get married over spring break?" And no one ever said anything. It's not quite the same today that it was back in the day that April and I got married. Um, but I do remember very distinctly one time at the end of that class, a young lady came up to me and said, Professor Coleman, I got married over spring break. And she's the only one out of all those many classes I taught who admitted to getting married over spring break in her senior year. So, anyhow, there's my wedding picture. And then after we got married, I spent the summer at Selinsgrove, where Susquehanna was located, actually living in the house of the physical chemist, general chemist. He loaned his house to me in April. He was off on a research grant elsewhere in the world and gave his house to April and me to take care of, which we did. And I was involved in a research project that summer with Tom McGrath, the organic chemist, biochemist. So I had a nice introduction to research over the summer there at the end of my Susquehanna experience. And Dr. McGrath also took me. We drove to Pittsburgh for a national meeting of the American Chemical Society, and it was at that national meeting that I met a young man who was involved with Dr. Brown, Herbert Brown at Purdue University. So I quizzed this young man about Purdue and Dr. Brown because I had my eyes fixed on Purdue early on. There were two professors that I could see myself working with. One was Herbert Brown and the synthetic chemistry that he did, and the other was Bob Benkesser and the synthetic chemistry that he did. Now, Benkesser was involved with Grignard reagents, and Herb Brown was involved with organoborane compounds. So I was happy going to Purdue, could see myself working with either one of those individuals. And here is a main gate into Purdue University. Now, let me tell you about the culture shock going to Purdue. I left I left Susquehanna University, which had a total student population of between 1,200 and 1,400 students. I had 10 to 12 chemistry majors in my graduating class, and I went to Purdue. And I got on a campus where there were, at the time, 35,000 students. And general chemistry at Purdue University had over 7,000 students in general chemistry. Think about that. I'm coming from a university where the total population was 12 to 1,400, and I'm going to a university where general chemistry had more students in it than my whole university. Well, why was that? Well, Purdue was an engineering school, and engineering required general chemistry. Purdue had a veterinary school. The veterinary school required general chemistry. Purdue had a pharmacy school. The pharmacy school required general chemistry. Purdue had a strong biology program. The biology program required general chemistry. You get the idea. All these different schools on the campus required general chemistry, thus the massive general chemistry population. And it was taught in the Elliott C. Fisher Hall of Music, which was a replica of Radio City Music Hall in New York. And the Fisher Hall of Music on the Purdue campus held 6,600 students. Not quite enough for the total general chemistry population, but there were ways around that. And many times you didn't have all the students showing up for lecture. So we had this massive lecture auditorium with a lot of TV monitors strategically placed all around that you could actually see close up what the lecture individual was doing way down front on the stage, looking like one of my aunts, if you will, in this big auditorium. We also had general chemistry labs in Quonset huts from World War II. The main chemistry building didn't have a lab space big enough to accommodate 7,000 students. So the laboratory was taught in Quonset huts, and the lecture was taught in the Elliott Fisher Hall of Music. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing to a young man coming out of the experience that I had. But I settled in pretty well. April and I got an apartment in Lafayette. I'd commute across the Wabash River to the campus and got settled into to the chemistry department. I was fortunate enough, excuse me, I need a drink. I was fortunate enough to get linked up with Herb Brown. And I was delighted when he accepted me into his research group. Now, that didn't seem to be a problem to him, or it wouldn't have been a problem to any of the professors in the chemistry department because I came to Purdue with a National Science Foundation fellowship. So I was actually coming in with my own money, and they didn't really have to support me at all. So I guess I was an easy pick for Herb, if you will. And I was delighted to work with Professor Brown. He had a massive research operation back then. There were 25 PhD students and 10 postdoctoral students and zero, you understand me? Zero undergraduates. He didn't have any undergraduates. His one bow to the undergraduate program was a guest lecture in organic chemistry once a year. The rest of his time was devoted to writing research grants and helping all those PhD students and postdoctoral students. At the time I was there was a postdoctoral student from Russia, and that was the first Russian postdoc in the United States, and he ended up with Professor Brown. Now, Professor Brown was a named professor. He was the Richard B. Wetherill Research Professor of Chemistry. And that was nice, in his opinion, not so much because he had this named professorship, but because he had his own private parking place in front of the chemistry building. And that's what he cherished the most. So think about that. Think about parking at the William and Mary campus, okay? And you get an idea that Herb was extremely happy having his own private parking place right in front of the chemistry building. Now, he and his wife, Sarah, were a delightful couple. April and I enjoyed them immensely. And most of the students in his lab were married already. And Professor Brown and his wife, Sarah, were global travelers. He was always being invited to conferences and meetings around the world. And he turned out to be a beer connoisseur. So he would frequently bring back beers from around the world. And we would have parties down by the Wabash River, sitting around just enjoying one another's company and listening to Professor Brown's stories. And he always had a sampling of beers for everybody to try at those parties. So no matter what you might have thought of Dr. Brown as a researcher, and he had a pretty powerful national reputation, he was very much a down-to-earth individual, and April and I both loved him a lot. He loved his wife Sarah a lot also. So that was my Purdue adventure, and I got my PhD in August of 1970 and came right to William and Mary with a fresh PhD. So thinking about that, I just retired from my first job. Okay, I've been at Purdue ever since I got that PhD. So that's my first job, and I'm going to tell you all about my first office adventures here in a moment. I'm going to talk about pre-medical advising. I taught organic chemistry and biochemistry early on, and those are key courses for pre-medical students. So I got to know the pre-meds early on at William and Mary, and found out that they didn't have a proper advising structure, and volunteered to be the pre-medical advisor, went to my chairman, went to the dean, got approval to start organizing a pre-medical advising program. This was in 1970. I'm also going to talk about the new chemistry building that was built in 1975 It's part of the integrated science center that we have now. It's the part of the science center that has the greenhouse on top of it. That was uh, that was the new chemistry building. And then I'm going to talk about some NASA connections that I have and continue to appreciate. And we'll look at all of that here in this decade here, starting my career at William and Mary. So my first office was in Rogers Hall. It's now called Chancellor's Hall, and my very first office in at William and Mary was in this third floor room that I'm circling with my cursor here. That was the window to my first office. So here I'm coming to William and Mary with a fresh PhD, hired as an assistant professor. And guess what they gave me? They gave me the most spacious office that I've ever had in all my 54 years at William and Mary. This was a huge office that had its own private bathroom. Its own private bathroom. I can't fathom that any longer. It doesn't make any sense to me. But there I was, a young assistant professor in this huge office and a private bathroom. You got to love it. You know, I've had 5 offices on campus ever since. And the one that I retired from was a very nice office, but it wasn't even a third the size of what I had here initially. So I loved my office. I loved my colleagues. I loved this building. The building was called Rogers Hall, Rogers, Rogers Hall, named after William Barton Rogers, who was a professor of natural philosophy here at William and Mary. And when he left William and Mary, he went on to New England and founded the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and became the first president of MIT. So here was a real special man and a special name to go with that man, Rogers Hall. So in Rogers Hall, I was initially given the chore, I'll call it, of teaching general chemistry. My very first semester, the fall of 1970, I was asked to teach general chemistry, and it wasn't just me. There were 3 of us teaching 3 sections of general chemistry. One was Professor David Thompson, who is still with us. One was Professor Ty Tyree, who was the chairman at the time, and he's the individual who hired me to come to William and Mary. So Ty Tyree and David Thompson and I taught the 3 sections of general chemistry. And I had to scramble, frankly, to keep up and coordinate with what Thompson and Tyree were doing because we gave a common test in the course. So I had to brush up on my general chemistry notes. Yes, I know anyone can teach general chemistry, but if you've been doing nothing but organic chemistry and biochemistry ever since your undergraduate days, you get a little rusty. So I was keeping like 1 chapter ahead of my students. And I'm pleased to say that on May 11th, in the audience, I had a married couple who met in my general chemistry class there in the fall of 1970. The young man came to see me about a month before I gave this final lecture, just to chat about my retirement and to bring me up to speed on what he was doing. And he enjoyed telling me that when we gave out the seating assignments in the lab, we did so alphabetically, and either his name or his future wife's name ended in K, and the other name ended in L. So they were seated next to one another. And this young man used the opening line there in lab with this nice young lady next to him. He said, "May I borrow your pencil?" Okay. And I thought, man, what an opening line here. And he said, well, it paid off. He said, I ended up marrying her. And I asked the husband wife in our May 11th meeting there in the Commonwealth Auditorium to at least raise their hands, and they were right in the middle of the auditorium and got a nice round of applause from everyone. So there was a couple that got married and met in my very first class teaching assignment, general chemistry, fall 1970. Okay, well, from that point forward, I started teaching organic chemistry. And not long afterwards, I started teaching biochemistry. So I was very much involved with two key courses that the pre-medical students needed and became the organizer and creator of a pre-medical advising program for William and Mary that has carried forward right to this very day. We'll talk some more about that when I get to future decades here. But I wanted you to be aware of some experiences here in Rogers Hall. One fun experience that I'd like to relate to you. I was sitting in my office late one evening, and the building was very, very quiet. And I was grading some papers. My desk was close to this window facing, I had my back to the window, so natural light would come in over my shoulder, and it was pretty nice. Anyhow, I was grading one evening. There was no one around the building. It was very, very quiet, and I had my office door open. Now, remember, this is a big office door. I had my office door open, and all of a sudden, as I'm grading, I hear this. And I thought, what in the world is that? I didn't bother to investigate. I just continued grading, and then I hear this again. So I thought, well, gosh, something's going on. So I got up from my desk, walked to the doorway, and looked out in the hall. And here I saw the biggest roaches you ever want to see scurrying around on the ceramic tile floor. And they were big enough to make a noise that I could hear all the way at the other end of my office. So we had an interesting roach problem in Rogers Hall. Not only that, but in the organic lab that I helped to teach, we kept in the drawers of glassware. We had beakers filled with glass beads that we would use to pack fractionating columns to do fractional distillations. Well, these beakers with the glass beads in them seemed to be the perfect spot for the female roaches to lay their eggs. So it was no surprise at the start of an organic lab to have students opening their drawers to get glassware out. And all of a sudden you have someone screaming in the lab because there's 100 or so small baby cockroaches running all around on their glassware. So think about that. Okay. So early adventures in Rogers Hall. Well, we outgrew Rogers Hall. In 1975, we ended up moving to New Rogers Hall, which is the part of the ISC, like I said, that had the greenhouse on it. So we moved into New Rogers Hall in 1975. And in New Rogers Hall, my colleague, Bob Orwell, and I became the wizards for the chemistry magic show. And here we are putting on some magic show activities. This is right at the grand finale here. I don't want to talk about it just yet. I want to tell you about an experiment that I enjoyed doing in the chemistry magic show. We advertised the magic show to all the elementary school science teachers, if there is such a thing. Anyhow, the elementary schools knew that there was going to be a chemistry magic show at William and Mary. And we attracted a lot of students, young students, to the auditorium when we put on the show. We put on the show in the early evening. That's one show. And then we had another show later on where the jokes changed a little bit and were a little more nuanced than what we did for the small children. But the experiment that I liked the most, and I'm going to describe it to you. So it's a thought experiment, which means it's going to work. Okay. So I would make up ahead of time a supersaturated solution of a particular compound. Now, if you don't understand the terminology, a supersaturated solution is one that is still looking like a liquid, but it's really poised to turn into a solid without much effort. Okay, it can solidify almost instantly. So that was the solution I made up. Then I had a 12 by 12 piece of plywood with a dowel underneath that I could use as a handle. And right in the middle of the the 12 by 12 piece of plywood, I had drilled a little hole. And in that little hole that you really couldn't see from the audience, I put a seed crystal of the compound that I had in my supersaturated solution. So here I am standing with this Erlenmeyer flask. That's a pretty big flask of liquid, and I'm holding up this 12 by 12 piece of plywood, and I'm right in front of the little kids in the front row. And I say to them, now, do you think I can pour this liquid onto this board and not spill a drop? And they all say, well, no, you can't do that, because in their mind, they could see all this liquid and they could see that there weren't any edges on the raised edges. There was no way the board is going to hold the liquid. So they were all saying, no, you can't do that. So I started pouring my solution down onto that seed crystal, and it solidified instantly. So as I was pouring, it just became solid, and it built up an ever larger mound of solid chemical as I poured. And when I was all done pouring, I hadn't spilled a drop, but I had this mound of crystals on my 12 by 12 board. And the eyes of the kids, this is what I liked the most. The eyes of the little kids in that front row just grew so big in not understanding what went on. It was just amazement and awesomeness or whatever. You know, Coleman was a real magician. He turned liquid into solid. It was a lot of fun. And the audience burst into applause. The little kids were jumping up and down and screaming and saying, wow, all that good stuff. So that was part of the chemistry magic show, and I enjoyed it. And Bob Orwall, who is now deceased, I'm sorry to say, was my colleague in this adventure. And between the two of us, we did a lot of interesting magical experiments. Well, at the end, we always like to end with fireworks. I mean, why not? It's chemistry. And I had perfected some explosive compounds back in high school, along with a friend of mine who lived on my street. We did a lot of chemistry. Okay. We launched a lot of rockets. We exploded a lot of firecrackers that we made ourselves. So we had some knowledge of explosives and things like that, which you couldn't get today. I mean, we would go to the drugstore and buy the chemicals that we needed. They weren't hidden away or unavailable or whatever. But today you couldn't do that. I mean, if we tried to do that today, I could see the ATF agents descending on my house and quizzing my father about what in the heck was his son doing down in the basement chemistry lab. I mean, that's the way it would have been. Okay, so let me finish setting the stage here. I knew my way around some pretty powerful explosive compounds. And you see in front of us here, between these two poles, you see some white vertical pieces. These are pieces of filter paper that contain one of my explosives in them, and they're hooked to a copper wire, hanging from a copper wire, and down at the bottom there's a piece of copper wire sticking out the bottom of these white pieces, and the two pieces of copper wire almost meet in the middle, and it's right there where I had the explosive compound. Now I'm holding in my hand a Tesla coil, so I can send a spark into each one of those pieces of paper and set off the charge. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Bob Orwall is holding a hydrogen cannon, and he puts a cork in the front of the cannon, charges it with hydrogen, and then sets it off. So he's shooting corks out into the audience, and I'm setting off my explosive charges. Now, here's the secret. Well, not a secret, but here's the background. We did this to Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture. And if you listen to the 1812 overture and listen to the cannon fire toward the end of the 1812, it's not very regular. And Bob and I would sit down and listen to a tape of the 1812 and listen to the timing of the cannon charges in the 1812, because it wasn't regular. If it would have been regular, it would have been a piece of cake, but it wasn't. We had to time setting off our charges, my charges or his cannon, to each one of those booms in the 1812. So on the PA system, we're playing the 1812 overture and finishing off the Chem Magic show with this pyrotechnic display. So Bob's shooting corks out into the audience, timing with the 1812. I'm setting off my charges. Boom, the white paper disappears in a puff of smoke, and I'm banging and he's booming, and we do the 1812, and that's the end of the show, and people are applauding. And today we just couldn't do that because if we tried to do it, the smoke alarm system in the new building would probably go off and we'd have to evacuate and the fire trucks would show up. So we've lost a little bit of nice chemistry activity thanks to modern health and safety regulations. And I'm not opposed to health and safety regulations. I'm just saying in the good old days, we had an awful lot of fun doing our chemistry magic show. So appreciate that. And here's one of my NASA connections. This is Dr. Richard Williams, or Rich as I know him. He got his bachelor's degree in 1975, right when we left Old Rogers and moved to New Rogers. He got his medical degree from VCU in 79. Now, what I want you to know about Rich, there are several things I want you to know. He was right up to the end the chief health and medical officer for NASA. I used to call him a flight surgeon, but he said no. He supervised the flight surgeons, so he was one notch beyond flight surgeons. He became a dear friend of mine because we both have a love of airplanes, and more about that a little bit later. So as the NASA Chief Health and Medical Officer, if you think back to the launching of space shuttles from Kennedy Spaceport, on television, you would see a lot of activity on the floor of the center with a lot of individuals looking at monitors. What you didn't see was a balcony where there were 7 individuals called the red button individuals, and Rich was one of those. He was monitoring the health and physiology of the astronauts on the crew. And he had a red button in front of him, and if he didn't like what he saw on his display about the health of the astronauts, he could push the red button and squash the launch. So any one of those 7 individuals could push a red button and stop the launch if they didn't like what they saw. So here is Rich, a William and Mary graduate, MD from VCU, in charge, in a sense, of the astronauts' health and safety. And he traveled over to Star City in Russia to do something similar with the astronauts over there when they launched from Russian territory. So more about Rich in a little while. We'll come back to Rich and his son, Rich Jr., who also went to William & Mary, who I also taught. I taught Rich Williams Sr. Here organic chemistry and biochemistry. And I think I taught Rich Williams Jr. just organic chemistry. I don't think I taught him biochemistry. So here's one of my NASA connections. The other NASA connection from this era is David Brown. David Brown, you see, got his bachelor's degree from William and Mary in 1978. So he got it in our new building, New Rogers. He got his private pilot's license, PPL, his private pilot's license at KJGG, which is the local airport. We have a Williamsburg Jamestown Airport. More about KJGG in the near future. You're going to see it. It's one of the places I love to take students. So he got his private pilot's license in 78. He got his MD degree in 82 from EVMS. So he was one of my pre-med students. And he went on to become a naval aviator. Think about Top Gun Maverick and the naval aviators involved in that movie, and you get a sense of what David was doing. And he became an astronaut. Okay, now David was quite the character. He would ride all around campus on a unicycle, and he would ride down the main hall of the chemistry building, going to lab on a unicycle. And he had several different unicycles of different heights. So he could be close to the ground or he could be pretty far up in the air on his unicycles. And one summer, while he was at William and Mary, he actually joined the circus with his unicycle prowess and was part of a circus for a while. So David was quite the character. We're very proud of David. Unfortunately, you see not only a birth date here, but you see a date of death, February 1st, 2003. More about that when we come to the decade of the 2000s, and you'll see what happened to David. But I was very pleased to be part of his education and to know him quite well. And that brings us to the 1980s. In the 1980s, I, of course, continued to do pre-medical advising and got involved with advising on a national scale and ended up getting a National Advising Award for outstanding academic advising. So something that I was very proud of. I was involved with NASA some more. In the summer, since the NASA facility down at Langley Air Force Base was so close to us, many professors had an opportunity to write for grants to get involved in research activities down at NASA Langley. And I did, and got involved with a project that involved calibrating a shuttle instrument that was measuring hydrocarbons in the atmosphere. So we'll look at some ideas there. Technology in the classroom kept expanding, and I was very much into the use of the latest technology. My biochemistry course evolved from notes on paper to an overhead projector till I started using an iPad when they became available. So I was very much involved in technology in the classroom. And then toward the end of the 1980s, the freshman-sophomore advising program was not doing very well. This would be the pre-major program. Parents were not happy. The Parents Association, along with Sam Sadler, and at the May 11th talk, Sam Sadler was in the audience. He described himself as a liaison with the Parents Association. Anyhow, we were in the Sadler Center, and Sam Sadler was sitting there. So we were in his building, if you want to think about it like that. And Sam, as liaison to the Parents Association, made it pretty clear that something needed to be done about advising. So toward the end of the 80s, I got involved with an associate provost, Kate Slevin, and the Parents Association, and we listened to all the bad things that were wrong with freshman, sophomore, pre-major advising. And Kate and I put our heads together, and I wrote a grant to the State Council on Higher Education that got funded for 2 years. We got about $160,000 each year to support the new advising program that we were putting in place. So let me back up and we'll go through some of this. That's what's in store for you here in this program. So here's my Outstanding Advisor Award, 1988. This was one of 9 awards given nationally, and I was very pleased to get this recognition. And at the meeting on May 11th, I got a nice round of applause when I showed this plaque to the audience. Then we come to the shuttle calibration. And here is a space shuttle being launched from Kennedy, and I was there right across the causeway. So let me tell you a little bit of background about this experiment. Down at NASA Langley, I got involved with a lab that was just figuring out how to measure trace hydrocarbons in the atmosphere. And I had pretty good knowledge about chromatography and things like that, and started to set up a lab with a technician that would let us measure just trace amounts of hydrocarbons in a gas. And NASA liked what I was doing and wanted me to be part of an experiment where they were launching an instrument on a shuttle that was going to measure hydrocarbons in the atmosphere all around the globe. But to do that accurately, they needed to calibrate the instrument. So my technician flew down with all the lab equipment to Homestead Air Force Base south of Miami and set up the lab. Now, here's a technician. I need to tell you about him. When we were at NASA Langley, he was a technician in the lab that I was working in, but he was also a jazz saxophonist. So every day at our lunch half hour, I would eat my lunch and he would go into a closet and practice scales on his saxophone. And he taught me a lot about discipline and music because he did nothing all summer long but practice scales. And I said to him one day, I said, why don't you ever play a tune? And he said, well, I can play a tune anytime. I need to keep perfecting my feel for the different notes that I want to hit. If I want to be an improvising jazz saxophonist, I need to be able to hit a note on a moment's thought. No, I appreciated that, and I appreciated the serious effort that he put in to his practice. It rang home to me, and I truly did appreciate it. So he went down first, set up the lab, then NASA flew me down to Homestead Air Force Base. And the night before the shuttle launch, several of us drove up to Cocoa Beach in Cocoa Beach, Florida, not far from the Kennedy Space Center. We spent the night there, got up early the next morning, drove onto the Kennedy Space Center to a causeway where we could look over at the launch tower, which is the picture I'm showing you here. This is moments after liftoff. And it's right at the point where the shuttle is going through this cloud layer here. And it just brightly illuminated the cloud layer as it penetrated through there. So I like this picture a lot. It's pretty neat in my mind. So we saw the launch. Then we hurried back to Homestead, south of Miami, which is quite a long drive if you think about geography in Florida. And we're all set up to calibrate the instrument. So here's how the calibration went. We had a Learjet, a NASA Learjet, that actually was confiscated from a drug dealer in Texas. NASA got it after it was confiscated and made sure it was flight worthy. And we needed a Learjet as opposed to a Citation jet. A Learjet has a operating ceiling of about 51,000 feet. And for our experiment, we wanted to get up to at least 50,000 feet in the atmosphere. So a Learjet was called for. So my technician and I cleaned up and evacuated 12 stainless steel cylinders. So they were under vacuum. There was nothing inside them, had a valve that you could close off, and got them loaded in the Learjet. And the pilot and co-pilot took off and got up to 50,000 feet and knew when the shuttle was coming over an area close to the south of Florida. And the shuttle would go over that area and take a picture, in a sense, use the instrument to take a picture of the column of atmosphere at a particular location. So the Learjet pilot knew where that location was and came flying in at 50,000 feet and put the Learjet in a tight spiral all the way down, spiraling right through that column of air down to the deck. Okay, now the technician on board, starting at 50,000 feet, evacuated or opened up the valve on the evacuated cylinder and sucked in some atmosphere at that level. And then at 45,000 feet, sucked in atmosphere, 40,000 feet, sucked in atmosphere, and so on, right down to the deck. They flew back to the base there at Homestead. Technician brought all these bottles in, and he and I started analyzing the hydrocarbons in each of those bottles. So we had a profile of hydrocarbons right down through the column of air that the shuttle instrument had shown its instrument down through. So we could report back to the engineers associated with that instrument and tell them what the hydrocarbons were at the different layers of the atmosphere. So they could use that data and calibrate the instrument as they did. And that instrument was used then in the global uh, uh, process of the shuttle going round and around, was able to do a hydrocarbon atmospheric profile for the Earth. And that was a really fun thing to be involved with. So a little bit different sidelight than what chemistry professors normally are doing. You know, I'm busy teaching organic chemistry and biochemistry at William and Mary, but in the summer, in this particular summer, I had fun going down to Florida and helping to calibrate a shuttle instrument. Oh, pretty cool. And that brings us to the 1990s. Now at William and Mary, we had established the freshman sophomore pre-major advising program in 1989, and I became the director of that program. When that happened, I gave up my research lab in the chemistry department, but I kept teaching organic chemistry and biochemistry. I never stopped teaching those. I never stopped teaching biochemistry. My last year here at William and Mary, I still taught biochemistry. So that's a lifelong activity at William and Mary. I taught organic chemistry for 35 years and gave it up in the early part of the 2000s, which we'll come to in a minute. But here in the 1990s, we got the freshman sophomore advising program off to a nice start. Not only did we have the grant from the State Council on Higher Education, but I wrote to the federal government to a program called FIPSE is the acronym. It's the US government. Of course, there's an acronym, right? FIPSE, FIPSE, Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. And I wrote a grant that came back, I think, at around $300,000 that supported us quite nicely and frankly got the attention of the administration because the administration saw that the freshman sophomore advising program that we had established was something that was worthy of this kind of support. And it opened the eyes of the fiscal administrators on campus to continue the program after our funds ran out that we had picked up from both Chev and FIPSE. So that's important. And I want you to know that that's another thing that I'm very proud of. So not only did I help establish a pre-medical advising program, but I helped establish the non-major advising program. And the non-major advising program is pretty much the same program today that it was in 1989 when we first put it on paper and set it up. Now, the last thing here in the 1990s, in addition to my teaching, of course, is I got the Thomas Jefferson Award in 1998. The Thomas Jefferson Award is the highest award the college can give you. And I was overwhelmed to receive it. I'm tearing up a little bit just thinking about it. So, Thomas Jefferson Award in 1998. This is the piece of paper that talks about the award, giving it to me. And it says, who exemplifies through his life, his character, and his influence, the principles and ideals of Thomas Jefferson. Wow. So I got this award. And everyone, every faculty member who gets the Thomas Jefferson Award gets a piece of paper like this, in addition to a nice sum of money, which we won't talk about. It's the award that's important. But in my case, when I got this award, I had a friend, a physician friend here in town, who was a real fan of Thomas Jefferson. His name is John Lanzelotti, or was. He's deceased now, I'm sorry to say. And Dr. Lanzelotti was kind of a Renaissance man. I don't know how to describe him. Not only was he a good physician and a a plastic surgeon at times. Pardon me. But he did a lot of interesting other things. For example, he made violins, beautiful violins. They sound great to my unpracticed ear, but he made violins and he sculpted. He sculpted. And when I got the Thomas Jefferson Award, he said, Randy, I have something for you. And he gave me this bust of Thomas Jefferson, which is a marble bust that he sculpted. This is an original bust from John Lancelotti. And it says so on this little certificate right to the side here that he is the sculptor. This is a heavy rascal. If you try to pick it up, you're picking up a giant piece of marble. So all the faculty at William and Mary who get the Thomas Jefferson Award get a nice piece of paper. But Coleman ended up getting not only a nice piece of paper, but a bust of Thomas Jefferson sculpted by a friend. And I'm very proud of that. Beautiful piece of work. The treatment that he gave to the eyes is unbelievable. And that's now residing in my house. It was in my office, but now that I'm retired, I have moved everything to my office here at home. Oops, and that brings us to the 2000s. So in the 2000s, I had a choice to make. I was about to resign from being the director of undergraduate academic advising, the pre-major advising, and I'm coming back into the chemistry department full time. Or as my colleagues like to say, I'm leaving the dark side and coming back into the light, if you will. How's that? Okay. So I'm coming back into full-time chemistry professor. I've always been teaching biochem and organic chem. I want to emphasize that never went away. But when I came back, I didn't have a lab. My colleagues took my lab, which is rightly done. I mean, when you're in chemistry, you need to have a lab, and if there's one vacant, you take it over. So they took over my lab. I didn't have a lab. But I also had been reading in the 1990s about dementia. One reason being my mother and many of her sisters suffered dementia in her declining years. And it was tearing me up to see her in this state, if you will, where she was becoming more and more forgetful to the point of being dangerous, leaving things on a hot stove, stuff like that, not good. We had to ultimately put her in an assisted living facility where she would have supervision. But as her mind declined, I wanted to learn more about what in the world was going on in the brain of someone who was suffering dementia. So I did a lot of reading of the neuroscience literature, and especially the neurodegenerative disease literature, and put together a couple of courses, brand new courses to William and Mary. One was the chemistry of emotion and behavior, which was a freshman level course with a small enrollment, 15 to 17, 18 students normally. That became so popular that I taught it every semester. Students really liked the material, maybe liked the way I taught it. I don't know, but chemistry of emotion and behavior. Had a nice reading list. The secretary frequently would say when she saw my reading list, she kept saying that she wanted to take the class, that it looked intriguing, and the students certainly found it to be intriguing. So I started teaching a chemistry 150 class, the chemistry of emotion and behavior. At the same time, I introduced a new neuroscience course called neurochemistry, which is really the biochemistry of the brain. But I called it neurochemistry, got approval from the Educational Policy Committee to offer it. So I now had an offering in the neuroscience program. And I've been teaching those two courses ever since. I started teaching them in 2004, as my prompts are telling you here. In 2004, when I gave up organic chemistry, I kept teaching biochemistry. So my teaching load from 2004 on was biochemistry in the fall, neurochemistry in the spring, and the Chem 150 each semester. I taught it every semester for the duration of my tenure here at William and Mary. At the same time, I created a new research direction based on all the literature that I had been reading. I decided to move away from a straight chemistry lab into a lab that would look at the biochemistry of neurodegenerative diseases. Now, something you can do with a PhD. So I reinvented myself. I truly reinvented myself from the individual I was back in the 1980s to the individual I was about to be here in the 2000s. So I started a new research direction. My lab got involved in neurodegeneration. I had students in pods of individuals doing Alzheimer's research, multiple sclerosis research, Parkinson's research, Huntington's disease research, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis research, which was dear to my heart because my wife's brother, who was career Air Force, passed away from ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. So not only was my mother suffering dementia, but I lost my brother-in-law. And I really wanted to know what in the world is going on in the brains and nerve tissue of individuals suffering these diseases from a biochemical point of view. Okay. I'm interested in behavior, yes, but I want to know what's happening down at the molecular level. That's where I am as a chemist. That's where my real interest is. So I created these new courses, new research direction. And then STS-107, the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster occurred, and I'll talk about it in a moment. And then in 2008, I got a Campus Technology Innovator of the Year Award, a national award also. So let's review the 2000s here for a moment. First of all, the neurochemistry, the neurodegenerative disease research allowed me to have quite a lot of students. I typically would have 20 to 25 students in my group. And here's one of the early group pictures with a couple of my grandchildren, here, Peyton and Caleb. Now, Peyton and Caleb, all grown up, if you will, at the May 11th meeting. Peyton wasn't there. She had a volleyball tournament in Richmond, but Peyton was there. Peyton is taller than I am now, and I'll give you a feel for the scope of the time frame here. So here are students that got involved in my research program. And my wife and I, at the beginning of the semester, would sponsor a program called Meeting and a Movie. So we'd have a meeting to get the students divided up into their pods of interest and find a time during the week where the Alzheimer's group people could meet and the Huntington's group people could meet and the Parkinson's group people could meet and so on. That was the purpose of the meeting. And then we'd kick back and watch a movie, some fun movie, whatever. And that worked very nicely for the big group to get them organized. So this is one of the group pictures getting organized. And here is the crew of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And here is our dear William and Mary astronaut, David Brown, at this point. The disaster was this. When this shuttle lifted off, apparently a chunk of ice hit the leading edge of one of the shuttle wings and poked a hole in it. Okay, that is believed to be the cause of what I'm about to describe. So everything was fine for the mission. They carried out all the experiments they wanted to carry out. But when they were ready to re-enter the atmosphere, somewhere over the Pacific, close to the California coast, the shuttle leading edge started breaking apart, okay, heating up and breaking. Essentially, the shuttle disintegrated. It disintegrated over California at 17,000 miles an hour, if you will. They found the bodies of these poor individuals in Texas at various places. David Brown's body was found somewhere in Texas with his orange uniform still on. Okay, so the tragedy is we lost these wonderful individuals. Their families suffered a tremendous loss. William and Mary lost its right now one and only astronaut, if you will. And he was quite a character, and it was fun to know him. Then in 2008, I was playing around with a program that allowed me to embed verbal comments into the papers that I was reading, because the neuroscience um, course that I taught was pretty writing intensive. So I had an opportunity to embed comments in a PDF file of that paper, where students, if they clicked on the little icon, they would hear my voice talking to them about the paper and what I liked and what I didn't like. And it was kind of funny. A student told me one time that he clicked on my paper in his dorm room and started listening to me, and he had the laptop speaker on, and his roommate said, "Who's that talking?" And this guy said, "It's Professor Coleman telling me what I did wrong on my paper." So so that was the thing that was my innovation, if you want to think about it like that. And the IT department nominated me for a Campus Technology Magazine award as one of the innovators of the year 2008 for my innovation using the tablet PC in the classroom and this program. So I received the award. The IT folks on campus wrote it up, submitted it, and I got one of 14 national awards out of 300 nominations. Again, I was very proud of that. So they saw to it that I got the award. And there was a national meeting in Boston, and I was invited to come and talk about my innovation. Okay, except I didn't have any money, and the chem department didn't have any money. So I went to the IT department and I said, "You guys nominated me. Are you going to send me to Boston or not?" and and they had to think for a bit to find the funds, but they did find the funds, and they did send me to Boston. And I had an opportunity to talk in front of the audience there about my award. Was very pleased about that. So I was pleased about that I got the award. Goodness, 14 national awards. I mean, come on. I was very pleased and proud that I was one of the awardees. I didn't like my ride in Boston, getting off at Logan Airport and driving into the conference hotel. The taxi cab ride was, I don't know how to describe it. I was glad I was in the back seat. I would like to hide inside a shell somewhere. The cabbie did get me where I needed to go, but getting there was a real trip, if you will. Okay, so I got the award. Then I went to the airport to fly back home to the airport here in Newport News. Um, it's called Patrick Henry Field, but it's the Williamsburg Newport News International Airport. So I had my plane ticket to come back home, and they had a special upgrade opportunity. For $50 more, I could get first class. They had seats available. So I'm in a kind of a euphoric mood. I just got this national award. I thought, why not? So I spent $50 to get an upgrade to first class. And it's the best money I think I've ever spent in an upgrade. I've never flown first class again. Never will. You will. But I got a right-hand seat on the plane, first class, little cocktail to calm my nerves, if you want to think about it like that. And we took off. And it was a late evening, early nighttime flight back to Newport News. So looking out the right window, I could see all of the East Coast cities under their lighting conditions as we flew down the East Coast. And it was a delightful sight for someone who enjoys flying. And I did. So that was kind of the capstone, if you will, of the experience with Campus Technology Magazine. I loved it. Then we come to the 2010s. And at William & Mary, as I got more and more involved in my dementia research, I recognized how important lifestyle changes are. That it's really important to have a good diet, it's important to have exercise, and it's important to have sleep. Okay, those are the big three, in my opinion. So I started walking around campus as part of my exercise routine because up to that point, my research was all on computers. I was very much involved with computational analysis of the biochemistry of a neurodegenerative disease. So a lot of time spent in front of a computer. So I started walking around campus. And as I started walking around campus, students would say, "Hi, Professor Coleman, may I ask you a question?" And I say, "Well, yes, you may, but you have to walk with me. So if you want to talk with me, you need to walk with me." So I started getting a reputation of campus walks with students, which I loved. And I introduced it to my classes and I said, "If you want to walk with me, that's fine, but we're not going to talk about class. I'd be happy to talk to you about your life, your future career plans, whatever, but not class." And they bought into that. So I was like a Pied Piper taking students around campus. And one of my favorite destinations was Lake Matoka by the Keck Experimental Station. So here's a picture of me with some of my students at the Keck lab on the pier, getting a selfie here. And the attraction on this day was, whoops, went the wrong way, was the turtle log. Can you see this log off in the distance? If you go to the Keck Experimental Lab and look off to the right, you'll see a partially submerged log. And at the appropriate time of the year, the turtles are lined up head to tail all along this log. You can see them in the distance here. So that was the big attraction. Students loved it. They never heard of the turtle log before. So the future of all this was, hey, you need to go for a walk with Coleman. He'll take you down to the turtle log. And that was a lot of fun. So that's one thing we did. Then you come back from a walk like this, and you would go to the Daily Grind, a nice campus coffee shop, sweet roll place that's no longer in existence, I'm sorry to say, because it was one of the favorite places for me to take these students after a walk. We'd stop in, I'd buy a blueberry muffin, doesn't matter how many people were there. I'd give a knife to one of the students and say, "Equally divide this muffin so we all get a taste." So it was a challenge sometimes. Okay, if there were only three of us, no problem. But if there were six of us, a bit of a problem. Okay, so we go to the Daily Grind and sit out on the back porch, and we're confronted by Alfred. This is Alfred the Cardinal at that time. Remember, this is the 2010s that we're talking about. Well, Alfred was the official mascot of the Daily Grind, and he would come and beg for a piece of the muffin. So I'd put a piece of the muffin, usually on the brickwork down here, and he'd fly down and get it. He never got bold enough to take it off my table, but he came close. I mean, he wasn't afraid of people. He came close. So he took the piece of muffin and he did one of two things. He either ate it or he took it off into the bushes to give it to his mate. Now, if you think about it, and if you know birds, a male of the species giving an offering to the female is part of their mating behavior, because the female, for most of her time, is going to be sitting on eggs, and she wants to mate with someone who is a good provider. So we needed to have Alfred be a good provider. And I'd like to think that the muffins we shared with him helped future generations of cardinals because he was pretty successful with the ladies there in the bushes, if you want to think about it in those terms. So that's my Alfred story. Now, there are other stories to be told here. One is the airport, KJGG, the little Williamsburg-Jamestown Airport. Here's a group of my students, including Matt Sass in the red-orange color here, who was the lead author on my very first Parkinson's paper. And I took these guys out to the airport to have lunch. It's a beautiful place, a little venue. The planes pull right up in front of where you're eating lunch, and everyone loves it. If you've not been there, you need to go to Charlie's Restaurant on the Williamsburg-Jamestown Airport campus, if you will, not far from our campus. So here I am with this nice group of students, my early students in the neurodegenerative disease research. And we were having lunch, And the next thing I know, Rich Williams shows up, Rich Williams Jr., the son of the um, chief medical officer that I introduced a while ago. Well, Rich has this Cessna 150 that we're standing in front of. And he and his father live in an airport community south of DC. Now, what that means is instead of a road, they have a runway, and instead of a garage, they have a hangar. And Rich Williams Sr., at the time of uh, this picture, probably had 4 airplanes in his hangar, which we'll get back to in a minute. So I was having lunch with these students, and Rich Williams showed up, and I asked him to join us for lunch. I bought him lunch. Then I asked him if he would mind if we walked over to his plane that the students could take a look in the plane. And he said, I'll do one better. For those students who are interested, I'll take them on a flight around the pattern. So a flight around the pattern is you take off and then you fly essentially a rectangular pattern and you come back and you land. And he did that for all 4 of these students. So here is Matt Sass in the cockpit getting ready to go. Okay. You can see the smile on his face. This is a new adventure for him. He's never been in a small plane before. And he took off. Whoops, backwards. And this is the view coming into runway 31 at the little airport. So when we're all done, Rich Williams Jr. puts the plane away. Now, Rich Williams Jr. has this lifestyle. He lives in Northern Virginia. He flies a plane back and forth to commute, and he has a red Jeep that's parked in the parking lot of this airport. So on a weekend, he'll fly home in the Cessna, and he told me many times he'll look down at the traffic on I-95 and just chuckle to himself because he's flying over top of all of it, going home to his airport community in DC. And then at the end of the weekend, he'll fly back down to the airport, park his airplane, hop in his red Jeep, and drive into campus. Quite a lifestyle, right? Okay, so I got to know Rich pretty well. I taught him organic chemistry. His ambition was to join the Air Force and be a fighter pilot. And this was just a step along the way. He was successful doing that. He is in the Air Force as we speak. He is flying an F-22 Raptor as we speak. He is the director of operations in Alaska of 525 Squadron of F-22 Raptors, guarding our northern border, if you will. So he's gone from this little Cessna, which can chug along at not a very fast rate of speed, but nevertheless, it's a nice airplane. And now he's flying one of these guys up in Alaska. So quite a jump for Rich Williams Jr. to go from a little Cessna to an F-22 Raptor helping to guard our country. Okay, more walks. Here's another group. They called themselves the Coleman Research Group. And all 4 of these girls came back to my final talk on May 11th. So we had a nice little reunion with all of them. They continue to keep in touch with me, especially Tan Pham here, who has been in touch with me pretty much continuously since she graduated. So we get together, go out to the airport, ask permission to stand in front of the planes and get a nice picture that kind of sets the mood. Then there's this other picture I'm about to show you. The time is 2012. 2012, the Avengers came out. And this group of 3 guys and 3 girls was among the best research groups I've ever had in a summer. And they got to know that in this summer of the Avengers that I was a Tony Stark fan, or Iron Man, if you will. So they bought me an Iron Man mask, okay, an Iron Man mask. I was going to take them to the movie, The Avengers Assemble, which came out that summer. And they said to me, "We bought you an Iron Man mask. Could you put it on, Professor Coleman?" So in my naivete, I said, "Sure, this is in the lab still." So I put this Iron Man mask on, and that quick, 6 cell phones came out, and my picture was taken and splashed all over the world. Here's Coleman in his Iron Man mask. Okay, I learned a lesson. Not quite. Um, so we went to the movie. I put the Iron Man mask on and went up to the ticket booth, and it wasn't very busy. And the young lady in the ticket booth just cracked up with me coming up with this Iron Man mask on. And I bought tickets for all of us to go to the movie. And I asked her, since it wasn't busy, I said, "Would you mind coming out and taking a picture of me and my students?" So she came out and took this picture of my students and me. This is from the ticket lady at the local theater. Now, let me tell you about these 6 students. Very proud of these 6 students. They all became physicians. Okay, they all became physicians. I'll start over here on this side. This is Kenneth. Kenneth is practicing medicine in Richmond, and he just bought a building for his private medical practice. So he's doing quite nicely. Taylor Broom is now at Duke University. She got her MD degree from Duke. Another one of my students tried to talk her into an MD PhD, but she said no. The other student is Chris Contos, who is at Duke. He's in charge of their MD PhD program, but he couldn't talk Taylor Broom into an MD PhD. So Taylor went off to do a residency in Michigan, and she came back, and Duke hired her to be on their faculty staff. So Taylor is now back at Duke University. Pete here is an ER physician in New York City, and I understand from the other members of the group that he just recently got married. So he's an ER physician. And I'm going to jump to the little lady in front here. This is Emily Rose Bainwall, which you can't tell from the picture, but she was the smallest of the 6 of them. But she was in charge of body pump at the local rec center. So she kept all 6 of them in shape. She'd take them over in the evening and give them a body pump workout in the rec center. So they were good to go. So that was part of their exercise routine. She's practicing private medicine in Oregon right now, and just recently had a child. And she told me that she almost named her child after my granddaughter Peyton, because she got to know Peyton that summer. But she ended up naming the child Reagan. So Emily Rose Bainwall is a practicing physician in Oregon. Then we have these 2 individuals, Amy and Alex, who got married. There were inklings of that during the summer of this picture. They seemed to be enjoying one another's company. And they maintained a relationship coast to coast, because Amy was out in California and Alex was in New York. And eventually they got together and got married. So Amy has just finished her general surgery residency in California. And Alex is also now in California finishing up his neurosurgery residency. So Amy and Alex are the proud parents of a young daughter named Cameron. So that's the group from 2012. Then I got the other big award that the college gives. In addition to the Thomas Jefferson Award, I got the Thomas Ashley Graves Jr. Award for Sustained Excellence in Teaching. And this was in 2018. So that's the award. There was a formal dinner the night before graduation. This is an award that's given at the big graduation ceremony. This is me all dressed up in a tuxedo, and my wife in her pretty dress. Now, what you don't know is my wife likes to wear mismatched socks. And I can assure you that under this very elegant dress, she has on mismatched socks. Okay. So just a little clue there. So this is the night before the ceremony. This is me getting the award um, uh, from the president at the 2018 graduation. This is Taylor Reevely. And that brings us to the last decade, if you will. So I am still involved in research and publications in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to tell you about my retirement plans. So I continued to teach right up to the very end this past semester. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk about research first. This is a colleague down at Eastern Virginia Medical School and a graduate assistant, and then me. Frank Castora has availability of the National Brain Bank. This is not a real brain that he's holding here. And Morgan Shelton was an undergraduate with me at William & Mary and then a graduate student, and she went on to EVMS. She's getting her MD degree down there, but she's helping to write all these research papers that Frank and I are publishing in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. We've already published several of them. We have several more that are about to come out, and our research has really taken off. Just in the last few months, I've gotten invitations to speak at conferences around the world, including conferences where they are offering me accommodations, which doesn't normally happen. So I've had invitations to go to Paris, to go to Lisbon, to go to Barcelona, to go to Stuttgart, to go to London. All of these invitations have just come in very, very recently based on the research that Frank and I have been doing. So it's been a nice collaboration. Frank does the wet chemistry, if you will, looking at he can grow brain cells in his lab, and I can tell him what processes to turn off from the mathematical modeling that I've done to see if we can extend the life of the brain cells. He has access to the National Brain Bank, so he can get brains from various individuals. He can put in a request. We'll just use as an example a female brain age 65, let's say, and he suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And he can put in a request for a normal 65-year-old female brain as a control, and so on. So you can see what he can do that I can't do. So it's been a nice collaboration to have that kind of wet chemistry, if you will, wet neuroscience available. And it's been something that's been very important for the publications that we put out. Okay, last day of biochemistry this last fall, the students in the front row, all athletes, came up to me and said, Professor Coleman, would you mind if we put our jammies on for the last day of class? And I said, no, that's fine. I'll put on my Santa Claus hat. So here they are. I didn't know they were going to Target to buy matched jammies, but they did. So this is a front row jammy group from biochemistry. This is my neurochemistry class that just ended this semester. So this is a picture of my last day of class right before retirement. Kind of a nice keepsake. And I'm very pleased to have it. Then I thought I'd take a walk around campus one more time before retirement. But the problem is, if you start walking around the campus right now, you're going to run into chain link fence and green cloth coverings. So here's ISC 4, the fourth addition to the Integrated Science Center, and you see this detour sign right here. You can't get there from here, okay? You go over this way to go to Boswell Hall. Here's a detour sign that takes you way around the Muscarelli Museum, the Fine Arts Center. So you can't get there from here. I'm saying this, you can't get there from here, thinking back to my days at Purdue in Indiana. That was a favorite expression of people. You ask them for directions and they say, well, you can't get there from here. Okay, and it looks like that here on campus as well. We got all this construction going on. Drive around chain link fence, green cloth everywhere. Then the last remaining piece of Barksdale Field got plowed up, and we got these drills drilling down in the ground. And here's the chain link fence. When I took this picture, it didn't have a cover on it yet. You see ISC2, New Rogers Hall in the background with the greenhouse on top. My office was on the second floor, like right about in here, maybe. Anyhow, we got this drilling going on. Now, the purported plan is this drilling is going on as a geothermal well system that's going to heat and cool the three dormitories right next to the Barksdale Field. And when they're all done with this plan, they're going to bring the topsoil back, which they push to the one end of the field, and cover it up and make a nice grass playing field for the students again, which I feel is really important because the students love this field. I would look out my window and see them playing soccer or frisbee or whatever. And now all we have are these drills. Well, I got to thinking, well, maybe this is more than just geothermal drilling that's going on. Maybe this is something that the college is using to help pay for all these buildings, that the future of this particular piece of real estate might look like this. So we're suddenly pumping oil out of the ground to pay for everything. Okay, so I'm being funny. I know. Don't ever lose your sense of humor. Randy Coleman, teacher, mentor, and advisor, says, all right, don't ever lose your sense of humor. This is me in my empty office right before retirement. Looking at retirement, one of my favorite authors, Brad Thor, says true happiness is found by having something to do, having someone to love, and having something to look forward to. So let me tell you a little bit about my retirement. Then we're almost done. I live in a very pretty house in a nice neighborhood. One of the things I'm looking forward to doing is taking good care of this house and the yard and the property. I have a nice vegetable garden with my wife. We like to grow raised bed gardening. Every one of these pots is irrigated. So I go out in the morning for the morning paper, turn on the irrigation system for 15 minutes, and the whole garden is irrigated. So we grow nice veggies here. That's something fun to do. I love irises. These are irises that were given to me by Lisa Landino, a colleague in chemistry. But my iris love affair, remember I told you this talk was a love affair on many different levels. My original exposure to irises was back in the 10th grade of high school. The biology teacher said one day that he was going to work in the high school garden on a weekend, and anyone was welcome to join him to help clean it up. So I drove my bike up to the high school, and I was the only one that showed up. So I helped the biology teacher all day long on a Saturday to clean out the flower beds and everything. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm giving you something for all this nice work you did. And he went around in the flower bed and split the tuber of every different iris that was growing there. So I took home this whole collection of beautiful irises from the high school garden and planted them in my parents' backyard, which they enjoyed while I was going off to school. But I've carried those tubers with me ever since. And one of my plans in retirement is to try cross-pollinating some irises. They're pretty easy to do, but it takes several years till you see the product of your effort. So I'm thinking of taking these pretty purple blue irises and crossing them with other colors, peach, yellow, whatever, white, to see what we come up with. My oldest son on his farm has already indicated that there's a place for me to plant the seeds to see what happens. So I'm looking forward to doing this. Okay, here's someone to love, my wife, and the special humorous t-shirts that we have on. If you can't read it, it says together since 1966 when we got married. Notice the socks that she has on. That's exactly the kind of socks that she was wearing under that elegant gown that we wore for the Thomas Graves dinner. My son's farm, the Four Eagles Farm. This is the main entrance to the farm. We get together there as a group. My three boys, their wives, children, uh, my grandchildren. This was at Christmas Eve where we all managed to get together. They're busy individuals. Some are nurses, some are doing whatever. It's not easy to get all of them together, but this past Christmas, we all got together with me and my wife playing Mr. and Mrs. Claus, Christmas Eve. Okay. Everyone's here, including Granddog. Granddog is sitting right here on the lap of Luke, one of Randy's children. Our oldest grandson, Nicholas, is back here with the big beard, and his wife, Taylor, are in the front. He's old enough to be married. The other grandchildren are not. Okay. So that's a nice picture. Here is the pool house and guest house that Randy built on his property. I'm planning to spend a lot of time sitting on this front porch, not necessarily in the water, but on the front porch. Here is a pavilion where he has his charcoal grill and a nice place for us to eat in a shelter in case it's raining. And of course, a nice pool, which is an attraction in the summer. Not so much for me, but it's nice. Okay, I plan to do a lot of bird watching out at Randy's place. This is not from Randy's place, but here's a quiz for you again. What kind of bird is this? Only give you a minute because it's been a long time for this talk, and I'm sorry about that. Well, this is a partly mutated albino robin that was taken up in Pennsylvania. I say partly mutated because it still has an orange breast on it, but it's a pretty picture, isn't it? Okay. One of the things that I started doing unbeknownst to my family was to sketch. And I took as, I tried sketching eyes, which are pretty easy to do. But I thought for this final talk, I'm going to try sketching my wife. And this is April when she graduated the 6th grade there at the east end of Steelton, if you go back to that part of this talk. This is her 6th grade graduation picture. So I thought I'm going to use that as my model to try to do it. And this is what I came up with. Okay, this is a pencil and charcoal sketch of this picture. So it's not perfect, but it's my first attempt at a portrait sketch. And I plan to sit on the front porch of my son's house there at the pool and practice my sketching in addition to looking for birds. Okay, that's the end of the story. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and I love all of you.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you enjoyed Randy's talk. As we finished up that Saturday morning, we gave Randy a couple of gifts. You can see that Professor Landino is holding a lit lamp. It has a periodic table on it. It's been specially set up for to commemorate Randy. It's a particular item he liked very much. And then in the second slide here, you can see Lisa still got the lamp. And Chris Abelt has brought Randy out a customized captain's chair with the William and Mary logo on it. And Randy's checking out the chair and being quite successful at it. So we were glad to give Randy these gifts, and we hope he appreciates them in retirement. So once again, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.